He paid for silence. The NDA expired at midnight and a $900 million confession went public. Why confess now? The reporter's question hung in the air as cameras flashed, capturing Damian Wyeth's face on every network worldwide. The billionaire CEO stood at the podium, his normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain, tie slightly askew, dark circles beneath his eyes, a tension in his jaw that betrayed the cost of this moment. For 5 seconds, he said nothing. The silence stretched uncomfortably in the packed press room. Then, with a steadiness that belied the chaos erupting around him, Damian leaned toward the microphone. Because the NDA expired, he said, his voice clear and unwavering, and the only thing more dangerous than telling the truth was living in a world where she thinks I'm still a coward. In her clinic office across the city, Dr. Jade Elwood watched the broadcast, tears sliding silently down her face. Not because of the confession that had just cost Wyeth Global $900 million in market value. Not because of the scandal engulfing the business world. But because after 5 years of silence, Damian had finally chosen the path she had begged him to walk. Not for her. But for the world. For himself. For the truth. And in that moment, as markets crashed and reporters shouted questions, Jade realized that the NDA's expiration wasn't the end of their story. It was the beginning. Before the scandals, NDAs, and a $900 million meltdown that shook the global markets, Jade Elwood was simply a brilliant behavioral researcher who cared more about people's hearts than their headlines. The university clinic where she worked was modest, fluorescent lighting, beige walls, and furniture that had seen better decades. But within those unremarkable surroundings, Jade did remarkable work. Her research on emotional trauma recovery had quietly revolutionized treatment approaches across the country, though few outside academic circles knew her name. At 34, Jade moved through the world with a gentle intensity that put people at ease while simultaneously seeing through their carefully constructed facades. Her colleagues joked that she had emotional X-ray vision, an uncanny ability to identify the wounds people carried beneath their public personas. This gift wasn't coincidental. It had been hard-earned through her own history of loss and recovery. Orphaned at 12 when her parents died in a car accident, Jade had navigated the foster system with a determination to understand how people break, and more importantly, how they heal. That determination carried her through undergraduate studies, a PhD in behavioral psychology, and eventually to her position as head researcher at the university's Trauma Recovery Center. People aren't puzzles to be solved, she often told her graduate students. They're gardens to be tended. Some parts flourish, some parts struggle, and all of it requires patience and care. Her apartment reflected this philosophy, filled with thriving plants, books on psychology and philosophy, and art created by trauma survivors. She lived simply but purposefully, investing her energy in work that mattered rather than accumulating possessions or accolades. On a rainy Tuesday in October, Jade stood in her office, reviewing data for an upcoming presentation at the National Corporate Wellness Summit. Her research on executive burnout and emotional resilience had caught the attention of the summit organizers, who had invited her to present findings that challenged conventional wisdom about corporate leadership. Dr. Elwood? Her assistant, Marco, appeared in the doorway. "Your 3 o'clock cancelled, but there's something else you should see." He handed her a tablet displaying the summit's updated speaker schedule. Jade scanned it quickly, then stopped, her eyebrows rising in surprise. "Damian Wyeth is attending?" she asked, looking up at Marco. "That can't be right. Confirmed this morning. Apparently, he specifically requested to attend your session." Jade frowned, setting down the tablet. Damian Wyeth, CEO of Wyeth Global, was notorious for avoiding public events, particularly those focused on emotional well-being or corporate ethics. His company, a technological behemoth that had revolutionized algorithmic decision-making across industries, operated with ruthless efficiency under his leadership. The business world called him brilliant. Calculating. Cold. Some whispered, emotionless. "Well," Jade said finally, "this should be interesting." The summit was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that embodied the corporate wealth Jade often found herself critiquing. She arrived early, dressed in her version of professional attire, a simple navy dress, minimal jewelry, and comfortable shoes that wouldn't distract her during her presentation. The ballroom was already filling with executives, consultants, and researchers when Jade took her place at the side of the stage. As the moderator made introductions, she scanned the audience, wondering if Damian Wyeth had actually shown up or if his RSVP had been a staff error. Then she saw him. Seated alone in the back row, Damian Wyeth was unmistakable even to someone who had only seen him in magazine photos. Tall, with dark hair cut precisely, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Jade's monthly salary. His posture was perfect, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at his phone or speak to anyone nearby. He simply waited, watching the stage with an intensity that was almost palpable. When Jade was introduced, she pushed thoughts of Wyeth aside and focused on her presentation. For the next hour, she shared research on how emotional suppression in corporate cultures led to decreased innovation, higher turnover, and ultimately, ethical blind spots that could threaten entire organizations. The myth of the emotionless leader is just that, a myth, she concluded, her voice steady and clear. What we perceive as strength is often disconnection. What we reward as focus is frequently avoidance. And what we celebrate as decisiveness can become dangerous when separated from emotional intelligence and ethical consideration. Throughout her talk, Jade had deliberately avoided looking at Damian Wyeth. But as she finished and the audience applauded, her eyes found him automatically. He hadn't moved. Hadn't taken notes. Hadn't shown any reaction at all. But he had stayed. For the entire hour. And he was looking directly at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. After the Q&A session, Jade gathered her materials, expecting to head to the networking reception. Instead, Marco approached with a message. "Mr. Wyeth would like to speak with you privately," he said, looking slightly odd. "His assistant is waiting to escort you to a meeting room." Jade hesitated. Did he say why? No. Just that it's important and he would appreciate 15 minutes of your time. Curiosity won over caution. Jade followed a sleek, efficient woman in a black suit to a private meeting room on the hotel's top floor. The door opened to reveal Damian Wyeth standing at the window, looking out over the city skyline. "Dr. Elwood," he said, turning as she entered. "Thank you for making time." Up close, Damian Wyeth was even more striking, and more tightly controlled. His movements were precise, his expression carefully neutral. But Jade's trained eye caught the subtle signs others might miss, the slight tension around his mouth, the way his hands remained perfectly still rather than gesturing naturally, the careful modulation of his voice. "Your presentation was illuminating," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "I'm glad you found it valuable," Jade replied, studying him openly. "Though I admit I'm surprised you attended. Your company isn't known for prioritizing emotional intelligence in its culture." A flicker of something, amusement. Respect, crossed his face before disappearing. Direct. "I appreciate that." He gestured to the chairs. "May we sit?" Once seated, Damian leaned forward slightly, his posture still impeccable but somehow less rigid. "I have a proposition, Dr. Elwood. A professional one. I'm listening. I'd like to engage your services as a consultant. Privately, not through your university. To discuss some of the concepts you presented today and their potential application." Jade tilted her head, considering him. Application to Wyeth Global. Application to me. The admission hung in the air between them, unexpected, almost vulnerable in its directness. "Mr. Wyeth," Jade said carefully, "I'm a researcher, not a therapist. If you're seeking personal counseling—" "I'm not," he interrupted, then seemed to catch himself. "Forgive me. What I mean is, I'm interested in your specific research on emotional processing in high-pressure decision environments. Your academic perspective, not therapy. Jade studied him for a long moment. Her instincts told her there was more to this request than he was stating, but also that his interest was genuine. I could arrange a consultation, she said finally. But I should be clear, my research challenges many of the principles your company seems built upon. I won't soften my findings to make them more palatable. For the first time, something like a real smile touched Damian's lips. I wouldn't expect you to, Dr. Elwood. That's precisely why I'm interested in your perspective. They arranged to meet the following week at her university office, neutral territory where Jade felt most comfortable. As she left the meeting room, Jade couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just begun, though she couldn't have imagined just how profound, and ultimately devastating, that beginning would become. Their first consultation was formal, almost clinical. Damian arrived exactly on time, dressed impeccably but less imposingly than at the summit. He asked precise questions about her research methodology, findings, and implications. Jade answered with equal precision, watching as he absorbed information with remarkable speed and clarity. What struck her most was his focus. When Damian Wyeth listened, he listened completely, no checking phones, no wandering attention, no interruptions. It was as if the rest of the world ceased to exist. Your research suggests that emotional suppression leads to impaired decision-making, he noted toward the end of their session. But what about those who don't suppress emotions so much as process them differently? Something in his phrasing caught Jade's attention. Are you asking about neurodivergence? Conditions that affect emotional processing? A barely perceptible tension appeared in his shoulders. Yes. Hypothetically. That's a different scenario entirely, Jade replied carefully. Processing differences aren't the same as suppression. The key is awareness and adaptation, not forcing neurotypical patterns. Damian nodded, making a note. And your professional opinion on medication versus behavioral adaptation? It depends entirely on the individual and the specific condition, Jade said. There's no universal answer. Why do you ask? Academic interest, he replied, closing his notebook with a finality that signaled the end of their session. This has been valuable, Dr. Elwood. I'd like to continue our consultations, if you're amenable. Those consultations became weekly. Each time, the conversation grew less formal, more substantive. Damian began sharing specific scenarios from his corporate experience, ethical dilemmas, leadership challenges, moments when emotional clarity might have changed outcomes. Jade found herself increasingly intrigued by the man behind the billionaire facade. Damian Wyeth was brilliant, certainly, but also more complex than his public image suggested. He possessed a dry wit that emerged rarely but genuinely. He asked questions that revealed a deep concern for consequences, even as his business decisions sometimes seemed coldly calculated. During their fourth session, as rain lashed against the windows of Jade's office, something shifted. May I speak candidly, Dr. Elwood? Damian asked, setting aside his usual notebook. I'd prefer it, actually. I have a condition. The words came out precisely, as if he had rehearsed them. Emotional processing impairment. Diagnosed in childhood, managed through medication and behavioral adaptations. Jade kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced with the implications. Thank you for sharing that. It contextualizes some of our discussions. It's not public knowledge, he continued. The board knows. A few key executives. No one else. I understand the need for privacy. Especially in your position. Damian's gaze was direct, assessing. The world believes I'm cold by choice. Calculating by nature. It's simpler that way. But not accurate, Jade observed. No. A pause. Not entirely. That admission, small but significant, marked a turning point. Their consultations gradually evolved from professional to personal. Damian began arriving after business hours, their conversations extending beyond the scheduled time. They discussed books, ethical philosophy, the nature of responsibility in a world where algorithms increasingly made decisions that affected human lives. Jade found herself sharing her own history, her parents' death, her journey through the foster system, her determination to understand human resilience. Damian listened with that complete focus that made her feel truly seen. "You built a career around helping others heal," he observed one evening as they shared takeout dinner in her office. "I built one around systems and structures that don't require emotional navigation." "Different responses to different experiences," Jade replied. "Neither inherently wrong. But one more sustainable for actual human connection," Damian said, a rare self-criticism in his voice. 3 months into their weekly meetings, Jade realized 2 uncomfortable truths. She had developed feelings for Damian Wyeth that went beyond professional interest, and he was showing signs of the same. It was subtle, the way his normally perfect posture relaxed in her presence, how their conversations included more personal disclosure, the fact that he had begun bringing her favorite tea without being asked. Small things that, to someone who studied human behavior, spoke volumes. One night, as a winter storm raged outside, Damian arrived at her office looking uncharacteristically disheveled. His tie was loosened, his hair slightly mussed, a tension in his movements that Jade had never seen before. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately. "Board meeting," he said tersely. "Quarterly projections. Acquisition targets. The usual." But Jade knew it wasn't usual at all. Something had shaken him. "Damian," she said gently, using his first name as she had begun doing in recent weeks, "what really happened?" He paced the small office, energy radiating from him in waves. "They want to expand the predictive policing division. Triple the contracts. Move into new markets. And you don't." "I created that division," he said, stopping abruptly. "It's our most profitable segment. But today, during the presentation, I couldn't stop thinking about your research on algorithmic bias and ethical blind spots." Jade waited, sensing there was more. Damian turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I need to tell you something. Something I've never told anyone." What followed was a confession that would eventually shake markets and destroy billions in value. But that night, it was simply a truth shared between 2 people who had developed a connection neither had anticipated. The predictive policing division of Wyeth Global had been built on a flawed algorithm. One that Damian had discovered early in development but had allowed to be implemented anyway, under pressure from investors and with the belief that the flaws would be corrected in subsequent versions. They weren't. And in 3 separate cities, the algorithm had led to wrongful arrests that escalated into violence. 5 deaths in total. Not murder, but devastating negligence, buried internally, never disclosed. The families were paid settlements with non-disclosure agreements, Damian said, his voice hollow. The code was eventually fixed. The problem solved. But those people are still dead. Jade sat perfectly still, absorbing the weight of his confession. "How long ago?" 7 years. Before I became CEO. But I was head of development. I knew the risks. I allowed the rollout anyway. And no one outside the company knows. No one. Jade took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Damian, you need to make this right. Not just internally, but publicly. Those families deserve the truth. The cities using your software deserve transparency." "It would destroy the company," he said, though without the conviction she expected. "Billions in value. Thousands of jobs. Maybe," Jade acknowledged. "Or maybe taking responsibility would ultimately strengthen Wyeth Global. Create a new standard for corporate accountability." Damian moved to the window, staring out at the storm. "I don't know if I can do that." "I think you can," Jade said softly. "I think that's why you're telling me now." He turned back to her, vulnerability evident in his expression. "I've never met anyone like you, Jade. You see things, see me, with such clarity." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Damian crossed the room and, with uncharacteristic impulsiveness, took her hand in his. "I came here tonight to tell you that our professional consultations should end," he said quietly. "Because what I feel for you has become decidedly unprofessional." Jade's heart raced, but her mind remained clear. "Damian, we can't explore those feelings until you address what you've just told me. It would be built on a foundation that can't support it." "I know," he said, his voice rough with emotion he rarely expressed. "That's why I'm going to fix it. For the right reasons this time." He left that night with a promise to develop a plan for disclosure, one that would honor the truth while minimizing collateral damage to innocent employees and legitimate parts of the business. For 2 weeks, Jade didn't hear from him. No calls, no messages, no consultations. She worried that he had retreated, that the vulnerability of that night had triggered a regression to his carefully controlled public persona. Then, on a Tuesday morning, a courier arrived at her office with a thick envelope bearing the Wyeth Global logo. Inside was not the disclosure plan she had hoped for, but a legal document that made her blood run cold. A non-disclosure agreement. 26 pages of legal language prohibiting her from discussing anything Damian had shared during their consultations, with specific emphasis on the predictive policing algorithm and its consequences. The penalty for violation, $900 million. A figure so astronomical it could only be meant to ensure absolute silence. Attached was a brief note on Wyeth Global letterhead. Dr. Elwood. Legal counsel advises this is necessary to protect company interests. Please sign and return all copies. Regards. D. Wyeth. No explanation. No apology. No acknowledgement of their connection or his promise to address the truth. Just cold, corporate protection. Jade sat at her desk, the NDA spread before her, a hollowness expanding in her chest. This wasn't just a legal document, it was a fundamental betrayal of everything they had discussed, everything she believed in, everything she thought he had come to understand. For hours, she stared at the signet. For hours, she stared at the signature page, weighing her options. She could refuse to sign, could take what she knew to journalists or authorities. But without documentation, without proof, it would be her word against one of the most powerful men in the business world. And the families who had already signed NDAs would be dragged into a spotlight they might not want. In the end, Jade made a decision that would haunt her for years. She signed the NDA. Not because of the money, but because she believed that Damian wasn't ready to face the truth, and forcing the issue might cause more harm than good. The families deserved justice, but they also deserved for it to be done right. She signed all copies, returned them via courier, and included a note of her own. "Damian, I'm signing this not out of fear, but out of hope that someday you'll find the courage to do what's right without being forced. The truth doesn't expire, even when legal documents do. Goodbye. Jade." Then she walked away. From the consultations, from the connection they had built, from the man who had shown her his true self only to retreat behind legal barriers when vulnerability became too real. Heartbroken. Silent. But not defeated. For 5 years, the NDA held. Jade rebuilt her life around her work, expanding her research, eventually opening a small trauma recovery clinic that specialized in helping people process grief and betrayal. She dated occasionally but never seriously, always finding reasons why relationships couldn't progress beyond casual companionship. She tried to forget Damian Wyeth. And succeeded, mostly. Meanwhile, Wyeth Global continued its meteoric rise under Damian's leadership. New technologies, new acquisitions, new billions added to its market capitalization. The predictive policing division was quietly rebranded, its algorithms overhauled without public explanation. Damian's public persona became even more controlled, more distant, more legendary for its emotional detachment. Business magazines called him the algorithm in a suit and the billionaire without feelings. Profiles noted his ruthless efficiency, his uncanny market timing, his ability to make difficult decisions without apparent emotional conflict. None mentioned the condition he had disclosed to Jade. None saw the man behind the mask. Jade followed his career from a distance, through news articles and occasional glimpses on business programs. Each time, she felt the same mixture of anger, sadness, and lingering connection that she couldn't quite extinguish. The NDA sat in her safe, its expiration date marked on her calendar not as a countdown to freedom, but as a reminder of what had been lost. 5 years from signing. Not that she planned to speak out even then. What would be the point, after so much time had passed? Then came the night everything changed. Midnight. 5 years to the second from when she had signed the document. Jade sat alone in her clinic office, finishing paperwork after a long day with patients. She had deliberately scheduled herself to work late, wanting to be occupied when the clock struck 12, when the legal bonds of silence officially dissolved. Not that it mattered. She had no plans to break her silence, no desire to reopen old wounds. At 12:01 a.m., her phone began to buzz with notifications. Then her email. Then text messages from colleagues and friends. Are you seeing this? Is this about you? Jade, turn on the news now. Confused, she opened her laptop and navigated to a news site. The headline made her freeze. Wyeth Global CEO releases shocking confession, algorithm errors led to deaths, cover-up. Below was a photograph of Damian at a hastily assembled press conference, looking both exhausted and somehow lighter than she had ever seen him. The article explained that at exactly midnight, Wyeth Global had released a 298-page document detailing a 7-year-old failure in its predictive policing algorithm that had contributed to 5 deaths, along with the subsequent internal handling of the incidents. The confession included signatures, timestamps, internal emails, and a personal statement from Damian Wyeth taking full responsibility for both the original negligence and the decision to conceal it. With shaking hands, Jade downloaded the full document. On page 1, a dedication. To J.E., who showed me that accountability isn't a burden, it's the only way to heal. She read through the night, absorbing every detail of Damian's confession. It was comprehensive, unflinching, and precisely what she had urged him to release 5 years earlier. It named no one but himself, protected the family's privacy while acknowledging their loss, and outlined a substantial victim compensation fund that would operate regardless of previous settlements. By morning, the financial consequences were becoming clear. Wyeth Global's stock had plummeted in pre-market trading. Analysts predicted a $900 million loss in market value, the exact amount of the NDA penalty. The board had called an emergency meeting. Shareholders were demanding answers. Government agencies announced investigations. And Damian Wyeth stood before cameras, answering questions with a directness that stunned the business world. Why confess now? A reporter asked. Because the NDA expired, Damian replied, and the only thing more dangerous than telling the truth was living in a world where she thinks I'm still a coward. Jade watched the broadcast, tears sliding down her face. Not because of the confession that had just cost Wyeth Global $900 million. Not because of the scandal engulfing the business world. But because after 5 years of silence, Damian had finally chosen the path she had begged him to walk. Not for her. But for the world. For himself. For the truth. The days that followed were a whirlwind of media coverage, market volatility, and public debate. Some called Damian Wyeth's confession an act of corporate suicide. Others hailed it as a new standard for executive accountability. The families affected by the algorithm failures issued a joint statement expressing appreciation for the transparency, while maintaining their privacy. Wyeth Global's board of directors was divided. Some members called for Damian's immediate removal, others argued that his honesty, however belated, demonstrated integrity that would ultimately strengthen the company. The stock price stabilized after its initial plunge, though still significantly below its previous value. Through it all, Damian maintained a steady presence, answering questions, accepting responsibility, and outlining a comprehensive plan to ensure such failures could never happen again. He also did something unprecedented in his public life. He disclosed his emotional processing condition, explaining how it had affected his leadership style and decision-making. "I was diagnosed as a child with a neurological condition that impacts how I process emotions," he explained during a televised interview. "For years, I viewed it as an advantage in business, a way to make decisions without emotional interference. What I failed to understand was that emotions aren't interference. They're information. Essential information that I was systematically ignoring." Jade watched each appearance from a distance, declining all media requests for comment, protecting her privacy even as she marveled at Damian's transformation. The man who had once sent an NDA rather than face consequences was now willingly dismantling his own carefully constructed image in service of the truth. A week after the confession went public, Jade received another courier delivery. This time, the envelope contained no legal documents, just a handwritten letter. Jade. 5 years ago, I made the worst mistake of my life, not the algorithm failure, but sending you that NDA instead of listening to your wisdom. I chose fear over courage, self-protection over truth, and in doing so, I lost the only person who ever truly saw me. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that everything happening now, the confession, the transparency, the accountability, is because of what you taught me. That healing requires truth, no matter how painful. The NDA has expired. You're free to speak about anything you know, though I've tried to ensure the confession covers everything. If there's more you believe should be disclosed, I support that completely. I'm testifying before a congressional committee next week about algorithmic accountability. After that, I'll be stepping back from Wyeth Global to focus on making amends where possible and ensuring the victim fund operates with integrity. I don't know what comes next. But I know that whatever it is, I want to face it with the courage you always believed I had. With deepest gratitude and regret. Damian. Jade read the letter 3 times, emotions swirling. Anger at the years of silence. Pride in his eventual courage. Sadness for what might have been. And something else, a recognition that the connection they had formed had never truly broken, despite everything. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the congressional hearing, where Damian testified for 6 hours about algorithmic bias, corporate responsibility, and the human cost of technological failures. He was forthright, technical when necessary, and unflinchingly honest about his own culpability. When asked about the timing of his confession, he repeated what he had said at the press conference. The NDA expired, and the only thing more dangerous than telling the truth was living in a world where she thinks I'm still a coward. This time, a senator followed up, "Who is she, Mr. Wyeth?" Damian paused, then answered simply, "Someone who saw the person I could be, rather than the person I was pretending to be. Someone who understood that accountability isn't punishment, it's liberation." The day after the hearing, Jade finally made her decision. She sent a text message to the number she had deleted but never forgotten. The trauma clinic. 7 p.m. If you still want to talk. At precisely 7 p.m., Damian arrived at the clinic. Jade had stayed after hours, ensuring they would have privacy. He looked different than she remembered, still impeccably dressed, but somehow less rigid, less armored. The weight of secrets no longer pressing on his shoulders. They stood facing each other in the clinic's small waiting room, 5 years of silence between them. "Thank you for seeing me," Damian said finally. "Thank you for telling the truth," Jade replied. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Only 5 years too late. Better late than never." She gestured toward her office. "Shall we?" They sat in the comfortable chairs she used for patient consultations, the familiar arrangement reminiscent of their early meetings yet fundamentally different. Now, there were no professional boundaries, no billionaire CEO and behavioral researcher, just two people with a complicated history and an uncertain future. The confession was thorough, Jade said, breaking the silence. More comprehensive than I expected. I had 5 years to prepare it, Damian replied. To get it right. To make sure it honored what you tried to teach me. Why wait for the NDA to expire? You could have released it any time. Damian's gaze was steady, direct. Pride. Fear. The same reasons I sent the NDA in the first place. And then, as the date approached, it became symbolic. A deadline for finding courage. And the $900 million. The exact amount of the penalty clause? Not coincidental, he acknowledged. A form of self-imposed consequence. The market loss was actually closer to $1.2 billion at its worst, but $900 million felt appropriate. Jade studied him, seeing both the man she had known and someone new. You've changed. I've tried to, he said simply. After you left, after I drove you away, I realized what I had lost. Not just a connection, but a chance to be better. To be whole. And your condition? Still there. Always will be. But I've found better ways to work with it rather than around it. Better medication. Better adaptations. He hesitated. Your research helped, even after you were gone. I read everything you published. Jade felt a tightness in her throat. I followed your career too. I know, Damian said softly. I hoped you might. Silence fell between them again, but it was different now, charged with possibility rather than regret. What happens next for you? Jade asked. After Wyeth Global? I'm establishing a foundation focused on ethical AI development and algorithmic accountability. Using what I've learned, both technically and personally, to prevent others from making the same mistakes. He paused. And personally. I'm learning how to live authentically. Without armor. Without hiding. That's not easy, Jade observed. No, he agreed. But necessary. What about you? Has the media attention affected your work? Some. Nothing I can't handle. She smiled slightly. I've had a few requests to write about corporate accountability and emotional authenticity. I'm considering it. Damian nodded, then leaned forward, his expression earnest. Jade, I didn't come here to disrupt your life again. I came to thank you. To apologize. To let you know that what you tried to teach me finally took root, even if it was years too late. It wasn't too late for those families to receive acknowledgement, Jade said. It wasn't too late for the truth to matter. No, he agreed. But it was too late for us. The simple statement hung in the air between them, a question disguised as a conclusion. Jade considered her response carefully. I don't know if it's too late or not. I know that trust, once broken, isn't easily rebuilt. I know that what happened between us was real, but so was the betrayal of the NDA. I understand, Damian said, resignation in his voice as he prepared to stand. I'm not finished, Jade said gently. I also know that people can change. That accountability matters. That courage, even delayed, deserves recognition. She met his gaze directly. I'm not saying yes to picking up where we left off. But I'm not saying no to the possibility of something new. Something built on truth from the beginning. Hope flickered in Damian's eyes. I would like that. Very much. Slowly, Jade cautioned. One step at a time. At whatever pace you set, he agreed. I've learned the value of patience. As they left the clinic together, stepping into the cool evening air, Jade felt a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not a return to the past, but perhaps a path to a future neither of them had imagined when the NDA expired and the truth finally broke free. 6 months later, Jade stood at the back of a university auditorium, watching as Damian addressed a room full of technology students about ethical algorithm development and corporate responsibility. His presentation was clear, compelling, and infused with a personal authenticity that captivated his audience. "The most expensive mistake I ever made wasn't the algorithm failure," he told them as he concluded. "It was believing that truth was something to be managed rather than embraced. That vulnerability was weakness rather than strength. That accountability was a burden rather than liberation." As the students applauded, Damian's eyes found Jade in the back of the room. The connection between them, once broken by fear and legal documents, had slowly rebuilt itself through honest conversations, shared meals, and a mutual commitment to moving forward with integrity. They weren't where they had been before the NDA. They were somewhere new, somewhere more grounded in truth, more respectful of boundaries, more appreciative of the courage it took to be vulnerable in a world that often punished authenticity. After the presentation, as they walked across the campus together, Damian took Jade's hand, a gesture that had become comfortable over the months of careful reconnection. "The foundation received final approval today," he said. "Full funding, independent board, everything we discussed." "That's wonderful," Jade replied, genuinely pleased. The foundation represented Damian's commitment to transforming his mistake into meaningful change. Funding research on algorithmic bias, supporting affected communities, and advocating for stronger ethical standards in AI development. "They want you on the advisory board," he added. "For your expertise, not because of us." Jade smiled. "I'll consider it. As long as there are no NDAs involved." Damian winced slightly, then recognized the gentle teasing in her voice. "No NDAs. Ever again. Only truth between us, no matter how difficult." They stopped beside a campus fountain, the setting sun casting golden light across the water. In the months since the confession had gone public, much had changed. Wyeth Global had survived, though with new leadership and restructured priorities. The families affected by the algorithm failures had received not just financial compensation but the public acknowledgement they deserved. Damian had stepped away from corporate leadership to focus on the foundation and his own personal growth. And Jade had found herself navigating an unexpected second chance, not just with Damian, but with her own beliefs about forgiveness, accountability, and the human capacity for change. "I've been thinking about what you said when we first reconnected," Damian said, watching the play of light on water. "About building something new rather than trying to recapture what was lost." "And?" Jade prompted when he paused. "And I think we've done that. Something new. Something better, because it's built on truth rather than fear." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not the same person who sent that NDA. I hope I never will be again." "You're not," Jade agreed softly. "Neither of us is the same. That's not a bad thing." They continued their walk in comfortable silence, each reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The campus was quiet in the early evening, students having dispersed to libraries or dormitories, leaving them in a peaceful bubble of shared contemplation. "The media has finally moved on," Jade observed. "No more billionaire confession headlines." "Thank goodness," Damian said with feeling. "Though I can't complain about consequences I brought on myself." "No, but it's still okay to be relieved when they ease." Jade squeezed his hand gently. The story was never about the headlines anyway. It was about doing what was right, regardless of the attention it brought. As they reached her car, Damian hesitated, something clearly on his mind. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you. Something important." Jade felt a flutter of anticipation. Their relationship had deepened over the months, moving cautiously but steadily towards something meaningful. "What is it?" "The Foundation is hosting its first major conference next month. International experts, affected community representatives, policymakers. I'm giving the opening address. He took a deep breath. I'd like you to give the closing keynote. Not because of our personal connection. But because your work on ethical decision-making and emotional authenticity is exactly what the conference needs. The request caught Jade by surprise. You want me to speak? I want your voice to be heard, Damian clarified. Your expertise recognized. Your perspective valued. Completely independently from me or our history. Jade considered the offer, touched by the clear separation he was making between their personal relationship and professional respect. I'd be honored. Thank you for thinking of me. Relief and pleasure crossed Damian's face. Thank you for considering it. The foundation director will contact you with all the details. As they said goodbye for the evening, Jade reflected on how far they had come from that midnight when the NDA expired and Damian's confession went public. The $900 million market loss had been substantial, but the gains, in integrity, in purpose, in human connection, had proven far more valuable. The conference, held at a downtown convention center, drew attendees from around the world, technology experts, ethicists, government officials, and community advocates. Damian's opening address set the tone with unflinching honesty about his own failures and the industry's broader responsibility to prioritize human impact over profit. Throughout the three-day event, Jade observed him with a mixture of professional admiration and personal affection. He moved through the conference with genuine engagement, listening more than speaking, ensuring diverse voices were heard, demonstrating the emotional intelligence he had once believed himself incapable of expressing. On the final day, as Jade prepared for her closing keynote, she found Damian waiting outside the green room. I wanted to wish you luck, he said, though I know you don't need it. Nervous anyway, she admitted. It's a big audience. They need to hear what you have to say. His confidence in her was unwavering. Your perspective on healing through accountability is the perfect conclusion to everything we've been discussing. As Jade took the stage 30 minutes later, she saw Damian slip into a seat at the back of the hall, present but not prominent, supportive but not centering himself. It was a small gesture that reflected the larger changes in how he moved through the world. Her keynote, titled Truth as the Highest Currency, explored how organizational healing followed the same principles as individual recovery from trauma, requiring acknowledgement, accountability, and authentic change rather than damage control or image management. When institutions prioritize protection over truth, she told the rapt audience, they create cultures where ethical failures become inevitable. The courage to face consequences isn't weakness. It's the foundation of genuine strength and sustainable success. As she concluded to enthusiastic applause, Jade felt a sense of completion, not just of her speech, but of a circle that had begun 5 years earlier when she first challenged Damian to choose accountability over self-protection. At the reception following her keynote, colleagues and conference attendees surrounded Jade, engaging her in thoughtful conversations about her research and perspectives. Damian kept a respectful distance, allowing her professional moment to unfold without his presence complicating it. Later, when the crowds had thinned and evening settled over the city, they found themselves alone on the convention center's rooftop garden. Your keynote was extraordinary, Damian said, handing her a glass of sparkling water. You could hear a pin drop during your conclusion. Thank you, Jade replied. It felt important to end the conference with hope. The reminder that accountability, while painful, ultimately leads to healing. Something I learned the hard way, he acknowledged. They stood side by side, looking out over the city lights, comfortable in the shared silence that had become a hallmark of their rebuilt connection. I received an interesting offer today, Jade said finally. The National Ethics in Technology Board wants me to lead a new research initiative on emotional intelligence in AI development. That's fantastic, Damian said with genuine enthusiasm. They couldn't have chosen better. It would mean relocating to Washington for at least a year. She turned to gauge his reaction. Significant change. Damian was quiet for a moment, absorbing the implications. Would you want to take it? The work is important, Jade said thoughtfully. Especially now, with so many companies rushing to implement AI without fully considering the human impact. You didn't answer my question, Damian observed gently. Do you want it? Jade smiled, appreciating his perception. Yes. I think I do. But it would affect us, he finished for her. This new thing we've been building. Yes. Damian turned to face her fully. Jade, I would never want to stand between you and important work. If this is an opportunity you want to pursue, you should pursue it. Without hesitation. And us? Washington isn't the moon, he said with a small smile. The foundation has connections there. Projects I could oversee personally. If you wanted that, of course. If you wanted space instead, I would understand that too. The consideration in his response, the careful balance between support and respect for her autonomy, touched Jade deeply. This was so far from the man who had once sent an NDA rather than face difficult truths. I don't want space, she said softly. I want to see where this leads. Even with complications. Even with distance. Relief and joy spread across Damian's face. Then we'll make it work. Together. As the evening ended and they prepared to leave the conference behind, Damian took Jade's hand, his expression turning serious. There's something I've wanted to tell you, he said. Something I should have said months ago, but I wanted to be certain it wasn't just gratitude or admiration speaking. Jade felt her heart quicken. What is it? I love you, he said simply. Not because you helped me find courage. Not because you forgave what seemed unforgivable. But because of who you are, your integrity, your compassion, your unwavering commitment to truth even when it's difficult. The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. You don't need to respond, he continued quickly. I just wanted you to know. With complete transparency. No hidden agendas, no expectations. Jade studied him in the soft evening light, seeing both the man she had first met years ago and the person he had become through difficult choices and hard-won growth. I love you too, she said finally. Not despite our history, but including it. All of it, the connection, the betrayal, the silence, and the truth that finally broke through. Damian's expression transformed with wonder and joy. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her. Their first since reconnecting, gentle and questioning and full of promise. When they parted, Jade smiled. No NDAs this time. No NDAs, he agreed. Just truth. However complicated, however challenging. Truth is complicated, Jade acknowledged. But silence is more dangerous. A lesson worth $900 million, Damian said wryly. And worth every penny, Jade replied, if it brought you to this moment. 1 year later, the foundation Damian had established had grown into a leading voice for ethical technology development. The National Ethics and Technology Board, with Jade's research team at the forefront, had developed groundbreaking guidelines for emotional intelligence integration in AI systems. And the relationship that had begun, broken, and rebuilt itself had flourished despite geographical challenges and busy schedules. On the anniversary of the confession going public, they returned to Jade's clinic, now expanded and thriving under her continued guidance, even with her Washington responsibilities. The small office where they had reconnected after 5 years of silence remained largely unchanged, a quiet space where healing still happened daily. It feels like coming full circle, Damian observed as they sat in the familiar chairs. From confession to commemoration. From silence to speech, Jade added. From fear to courage. Damian reached for her hand, his touch familiar and grounding. I was thinking today about what you wrote on that note when you returned the signed NDA. The truth doesn't expire, even when legal documents do. I'd forgotten that, Jade admitted. I never did, Damian said quietly. It stayed with me through all those years of silence. A reminder that eventually, I would have to choose, continue hiding or finally face what I had done. You chose well, in the end. Because of you, he said. Because you showed me that accountability isn't punishment, it's the path to becoming whole. Jade shook her head slightly. You did the work, Damian. You made the choice. You faced the consequences. With your wisdom lighting the way, he insisted. Even in absence. Outside the clinic windows, the city continued its rhythmic pace, people hurrying to appointments, buses rumbling past, life unfolding in all its complexity. Inside, in the quiet space they had created, Jade and Damian sat with the truth of their journey, the pain and the healing, the separation and the reunion, the silence finally broken. I paid for silence, Damian said softly, echoing words from his public statement a year earlier. You taught me how to earn honesty. And was it worth it? Jade asked. All of it, the market loss, the public scrutiny, the professional consequences. Damian's answer came without hesitation. To be sitting here with you, free of secrets, building something real. Yes. 1,000 times yes. As they left the clinic together, stepping into the bright afternoon sunlight, Jade reflected on the extraordinary path that had brought them to this moment. An NDA that had once seemed like an ending had ultimately become a beginning. A confession that had cost $900 million had purchased something far more valuable. The chance to live in truth, to love without barriers, to build a future founded on courage rather than fear. Some prices, it turned out, were worth paying after all.